Hello and welcome to Talkernate History, the podcast where we,
Matt
and Max, talk about works of alternate history scenarios, and history in general. Today, we're going to talk about something that's been rattling around in our brains for quite some time.
We're talking about the Banana Wars today.
Talkernate History goes bananas right here, right now, today.
Yes.
So the two of us, we read this book called The Banana Wars by Lester D. Langley. And we read this book because if you go to the Wikipedia page about the Banana Wars, it's mentioned in like the first paragraph.
The book actually coined the name The Banana Wars.
The Banana Wars, yes. And, I read this whole dang book, every single word of it. I finished it this morning before you came over here, and I was so sorely disappointed that bananas are mentioned very, very infrequently throughout this book.
That's true, but it's more about the history of American intervention in Latin America between 1898 and 1934.
1934, yeah. Just like the connotation of the Banana Republic is kind of where that name comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I learned so much dang stuff from this book. There was so much about the Banana Wars that I couldn't even imagine how much I didn't know.
Yeah, I know. To me, it was really interesting because I knew there was American interventions in Haiti and Nicaragua and in Mexico, but this book does a really good job of is that it doesn't go too in depth into the actual military engagements. It talks a little bit about them, obviously, because it's an important part of it, but it really actually spends a lot of time talking about the political and economic side of it, why these interventions were happening. It wasn't just that the United States, it's this mixture of economic interests, the U.S. trying to be an imperial power on the stage before World War I and after. It's very interesting. The Monroe Doctrine, everything's kind of folded into it.
Yeah, and there's even an element of humanitarianism to it as well, because there's a theme to a lot of these banana wars, and that's that there'll be a Latin American country that's having a civil war. All right. And then that civil war, it will endanger American or other foreign people living there, specialists, their business
Economic
people.
interests, yeah.
Economic interests, yeah. Or civilians who just happen to be living there. And then the Navy will just happen to be in the area and with no command from Washington, just acting completely on their own, because this is before like wireless telegraph is really, a thing. They just run on in and, we'll deploy troops here and we'll declare neutral cities where no one's allowed to fight each other, and we'll disarm rebels, and then we'll be gone in like a month or two.
Yeah, it happened a lot. And that was something from the book, especially from after the Civil War and up until like 1910. That happened a bunch. There's numerous instances of American cruisers or destroyers. Yeah. There'll be some disturbance in Nicaragua, Honduras. It's pretty much like everywhere, Panama, and they'll show up. They may shell some rebels maybe, and they need to deploy some Marines and what are called blue jackets, which is an interesting concept that existed at the time that doesn't really exist now, which is basically using like the sailors on the ship as infantry. They would show up, they'd land, they would protect the interests, maybe surround the city, protect the people inside, ward off the rebel faction, stuff like that. And this happened repeatedly. I mean, so many times that it's hard to find like a good list of all the different times this happened.
You go to the Wikipedia page, like some of them are just like, oh, in 1909 and 1911 and 1913 and 1914 and there's like so many that Wikipedia just doesn't bother differentiating them.
And this was just considered normal. It was considered normal by the people there, although it did build a lot of hostility towards the United States. It was just normal that they would, gunboat diplomacy sort of thing would,
Every single one of these countries where the United States intervened in is very angry about it today. Cuba doesn't like it. The communist government talks about how horrible it is. Panama feels like they got a bad deal.
Raw deal.
A raw deal, even, I can't believe it was just so horrible when Secretary of War Taft showed up in his lowrider and was shooting people with his MP5s. It was just, I couldn't believe that happened. It was just terrible. Mexico, super pissed off about Veracruz,
And the Veracruz expedition, and I learned a lot about the Veracruz expedition in this, and I think we may break down some of the different interventions it focuses on, because this book can't even cover all of them. Because there's so many, and it does, and there was interventions dating back to the 1870s, but this book really starts 1890s through 1934 is really the focus. But
yeah, I mean, I guess to start with, the most famous, kind of the thing that sets it all off, is the Spanish-American War. We did an episode.
The banana-ist of the banana wars.
The banana,
the mega banana of them all.
The plantain war,
Plantains.
Gotta cook
They're really
them.
good.
Bright green. I think I maybe had them once or twice.
You got to cook them, but man, they're good when done right.
But, Spanish-American War, the United States comes in. Out of it, they get Puerto Rico, which they annex. It becomes a territory. But Cuba, they have this thing called the, let me remember which one is which, the Teller Amendment, which, it's this amendment that's passed that says the United States promises not to annex Cuba.
Which makes S.M. Sterling sore.
So mad.
Even to this day.
Oh, why? Why? And then there's also, of course, the Philippines and Guam and all that stuff, but we're not going to talk about that. We're only talking about the Caribbean. And we're not going to talk about Puerto Rico, just Cuba.
There really was no American because it was American territory. Although there's some interesting stuff about fighting Puerto Rican rebels at different points. There's been a Puerto Rican independence movement, and all that.
Puerto Rican lords or whatever, right? Or is that something else?
Yeah, maybe but okay. So let's get back to Cuba. So basically, because of the Teller Amendment, the U.S. can't annex Cuba. However, they occupy it, and they really occupy Cuba for about a decade.
Really,
and that's something that I didn't realize.
Yeah, they have this thing called the Platt Amendment. So Leonard Wood is the first military governor of Cuba, and the Platt Amendment basically says that we promise we'll give Cuba its own sovereignty eventually, but in order for this to happen, we need to have XYZ happen for us to leave, and even after we leave, we'll still have a pretty good amount of influence on their economy and all this other stuff. If, for instance, Cuba has difficulty with their succession, if they have a civil war, we can just walk on in and basically call off the hostilities.
Good neighbor policy, just making sure everything's running right.
What a good neighbor to just walk in your house and
with a gun and make sure everything's good. Everything's good with you.
You better not be beating your wife, or else I'll throw you in prison and give her a new husband. Yeah, so
basically the U.S. occupies Cuba, and the point of the book really talks about there really wasn't any fighting in Cuba, or very minimal. I don't think there really was. More the book was talking about sort of the relations between the Americans and the Cubans and how that may have laid the path later for people like Castro and stuff like that.
Yeah. Like the very end of the book in the epilogue is when they start talking about Fulgencio Batista.
Ah, yes.
Yes, that man.
And there was actually basically a second occupation at one point for about 3 years because of they invoke the Teller Amendment and come back. But then you get to the more direct involvement the U.S. has, which is in what was called Santo Domingo, now Dominican Republic, and then Haiti and Nicaragua. Those are the big ones.
Yeah, Haiti used to be called Saint-Domingue.
Yes, that's what the French call it.
So Saint-Domingue and Santo Domingo, I think, are the same thing in different languages.
Yeah, Saint is that
Saint
Dominic?
Dominic, yeah. Saint Dominic, just different languages, I guess. I don't know. But yeah. Santo Domingo, a lot of the particulars of that occupation are a little bit lost on me, but basically, in both cases, Santo Domingo and Haiti both have tumultuous governments, civil war. There's all this bad stuff happening, and the United States just decides, well, we're going to run in and we'll stop all hostilities and have our own election. And it happens in both cases. For Santo Domingo, it happens between 1916 and 1924. In Haiti, it completely blew my mind. From 1915 to 1934, 19 friggin' years.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Occupied, basically, by the United States.
And who remembers that? Who knows about that?
Not in the U.S.
Nobody remembers that. Yeah. Nobody cares.
I remember the first time I'd ever even heard about that was reading it was a book about the history of the U.S. Marine Corps, and they talked about it, and I was like, what? Really? Occupied. This wasn't we landed, because it used to be we would do as we talked about earlier. They would land for a little while, protect some business interests, calm things down, and then leave. The U.S. basically occupied these two countries for extended periods of time. I mean, 2 decades, basically, in the case of Haiti.
Yeah, and both of these places, unlike in Cuba, there was an actual stiff resistance in both locations.
Particularly in Haiti, more so than the Dominican Republic. I think there was some fighting in the Dominican Republic. But.
Yeah, it was kind of a short, stiff rebellion that kind of petered off pretty quickly. Something about the Dominican Republic is that it was a status symbol to carry guns around. So like everybody was armed. Like private citizens all over the place had guns. So there was a little bit of resistance at the very beginning, and then it kind of petered out.
Interesting about the Dominican Republic is we'll address this when we talk about our scenarios section, but actually in the 1870s, the Grant administration looked at purchasing Santo Domingo to make it a U.S. territory.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I remember reading about that in the biography of Grant by Gene Edward Smith that I read. I think it's just called Grant.
Well, he was a man of few words, too, so I bet fits.
Yeah, but that completely blew my mind. I mean, we'll get to that later, but the story behind that is really interesting. Yeah. But in Haiti, it was crazy because Dominican Republic had some problems, but Haiti, let me look here. Between the years of 1908 and 1914, Haiti had 7 presidents. And like almost every single one of those was ended in like a bloody civil war or coup.
Yes. That is not good. That
No.
is a lot of presidents for a very short period of time.
That's horrible. The book, it talks about how there were these people, gonna butcher the pronunciation,
It's
but
basic. That's a president a year.
a president every year, more or less. Yeah.
Wow.
There was this group of people called Caicos.
I think it's Caicos. But
Caicos, yeah. I'll put the spelling up on the screen, but no clue how to pronounce that. But they were like, according to this book, brigands who lived up in the mountains, and they would just come down from the mountains and raid peasants and overthrow the government like once a year, once every 2 years. It just was this endemic problem that kept coming back over and over again. At this period in time, in 1915, Haiti's got a dictator. His name is Vilbrun.
Is it Vilbrun Guillaume Sam?
Once again, I'll put the spelling up, but no clue how to pronounce that. But, he was this dictator, and he was dealing with a Caicos rebellion. And in order to consolidate his power, he decided to just murder a whole bunch of people in prison, like over 100 people, including the previous president from beforehand.
How convenient.
And it's incredible. He ordered all these people killed, and just a mob of concerned citizens was so disgusted with this that they just attacked him in the street and chopped him to pieces. It's
street justice.
Unbelievable. He tried to, I think he tried to hide in the French consulate or something, and then they just pushed him out the front door. It's like,
nope. Oh, God.
No, thank you.
Wow.
But like, it was just this horrific thing that happened, and the U.S. Navy heard about it. They had a cruiser parked out in the ocean just offshore. They heard about this and they thought, oh my God, it's the Haitian Revolution all over again. Because in the Haitian Revolution, there was this horrible massacring of people that happened right there at the beginning. And they thought, oh no, this is going to happen again. So it's time for the same old story again. We're gonna
we'll land Marines and they'll restore order, but this time they stay for 19 years.
19 friggin' years. And this is the first conflict which extensively used Marines primarily.
Yeah, instead of a mix of Blue Jackets and Marines.
Yeah, before this, it's mostly Blue Jackets with some Marines thrown in.
Well, because at that point there were Marine detachments on these various ships, but now at this point, after the Spanish-American War, but before World War I, you start to see the coalescing of larger Marine formation, like battalion and regiment size. So that's what you see are these large formations deployed, and basically the Marines restore order relatively quickly. And the story of all these is they seem to restore order very quickly in like the capital cities, but it's these problems in these more rural areas. So they fight against the Caicos, and actually Dan Daly, the famous, do you sons of bitches want to live forever, won his second Medal of Honor fighting against the Caicos in Haiti in 1915. And Smedley Butler won his second Medal of Honor there too.
And Chesty Puller was not awarded a Medal of Honor there, but got his first experience fighting against the Caicos.
And then he will later show up in Nicaragua as well.
Yes, Nicaragua.
Although he is the winner of 4 Navy Crosses, which
What?
is the one that's like the one step below the Medal of Honor. It's the equivalent of the Distinguished Service Cross for the Army.
Would later be in freaking Korea. Chosin Reservoir. Crazy.
What a career.
We're surrounded, so we have them exactly where we want them, or whatever.
Yep.
Whatever it is he said. I want to say one thing real quick, because we've gotten a couple comments from the same person over and over about this. But they've pointed out that you don't win a Medal of Honor. It's not like a prize or like a...
Yes, you're awarded the Medal
You're
of Honor.
awarded.
Sorry.
Yes, yes. It's just so natural to say that you win it, though. And this book says, oh, so-and-so won a Medal of Honor for doing this. So, I mean, it's understandable why people say that. And we probably will continue to say it. But
we don't mean it. I mean, it's just,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's not a carnival prize. We get that.
Right. Yeah. It's not like Darkman. You get your stuffed elephant or whatever. You remember what I'm talking about?
I think I do.
Let's move on. Anyway, so the Caicos, so the Caicos have really crappy weapons. They just do like a traditional stand-up fight, and they're defeated pretty easily. And one of the Caicos leaders from this time, they're actually, when the United States holds their election, the U.S. Army comes in to actually run the election, and Matthew Ridgway is involved in that, if you believe it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Matthew Ridgway?
The guy from the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes. And commander in Korea. He was after MacArthur.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He died when he was like almost 100. He lived into like the 90s.
Yeah, but didn't beat Alf Landon, though. He's still the king.
No, that's right.
Yes,
That's right.
yes.
Yeah. But so the Americans basically restore order, and there's some fighting against the Caicos in north. There's like this capture of this fort. God, I forget the name of it, that they capture in this like really stunning operation. And that in 1915 kind of knocks the Caicos out for a little while. And then obviously there's not a whole lot of action during World War I. And then fighting restarts in Haiti in 1919 into about 1921.
You know, now that I think about it, they do talk about how in the Dominican Republic, there were some accusations of atrocities committed by the Marines. There was like some crazy guy, I think his last name was Merkel, who like had tortured a few people or something, and he ended up being arrested and was sent back to the United States for a court-martial and killed himself before they could do it.
Merkel?
But, yes, Merkel, believe it or not.
Angela Merkel?
No. She's got that very particular pose. You know, she makes that little...
She's been around forever.
Forever, yeah. The Christian Democrats. She makes that little triangle thing with her hands.
I once saw her driving in a car in London.
She was driving?
No. Sorry. Again, win award. She was a passenger in a car coming out of 10 Downing Street, and I waved at her, and I think it's been a long time, but I think she waved back, if my recollection, or maybe that's just a favorable.
Your memory is touching this up a little bit, yeah.
I don't know. I definitely saw her though in the car though, and they sped out, and they were ignoring all the traffic rules.
Oh, really? Driving on the wrong side of the road, eh?
Yeah. Exactly.
And a big monster truck riding.
Yeah. So let's get back on track. But yeah, so the Caicos, you have. It's interesting though, jumping ahead to the post World War I Caicos, is that fighting against them. I remember reading in that book about the Marines use like BARs against them. It was some of the first use of a BAR in action, although the BAR actually was first used in World War I very briefly and for a limited period of time.
It's in the video game Battlefield 1.
Yeah. It was used at the very end of the war very sparingly, but the Marines used the BAR, and it talked about, they basically also put down that Caicos rebellion pretty quickly. Although it talks about in one of them how there was like some ambush of a Marine patrol, and one of the Caicos, like he like took out they killed like one of the Marine officers, and then he like ate part of his liver or kidneys or something.
I think it was his heart, if I remember correctly.
And then they hunted him down and like riddled that guy.
Brutal reprisals. Yeah.
But also interesting, Banana Wars. First time Thompson submachine guns used in action in the 1920s.
Well, after they were used by the Postal Service.
Well, yeah, after the Postal Service,
right,
of
the
course.
Postal Wars, yes.
Yeah, that's right, yes. Yeah, and then you have Al Capone, he used it before them too.
Caicos. So in the first election that the United States held, there was a Caicos guy who was like the representative of his people, and he was disbarred from being in the election because he was seen as a violent warlord. But his name was Dr. Bobo, B-O-B-O. Maybe there's a French way of pronouncing that, but
Bobo.
Dr. Bobo. I'm sorry, Dr. Bobo, you are not, you cannot stand.
You've been disqualified from this election.
For this election.
Sounds like something from the Monster Raving Loony Party in the UK.
I love British politics. It's so interesting.
It's fascinating. It really, it just operates in a way that's so different from the way it does here.
I've ordered some short story compilations of British politics, and I'm gonna check them out when they get here. It might be something we could do.
I want to read those. I like the one on the front that says like Prime Minister Boris and other alternate history scenarios. Not alternate history anymore.
It's like Minister Boris and other things that didn't happen. And then the sequel is Minister Corbyn and other things that didn't happen. And hey, anything's possible, I guess.
Yeah. The possibilities are endless.
They truly are, yes.
But in Talkernate history fashion, we are off track again. Okay, so long story short is the Marines finally leave in 1934.
Yeah, FDR shows up in person to meet with the Haitian president or whatever and say, bye, see you, everybody.
Yeah. And because he institutes a new policy, I forget what it, but a new non-interventionist policy.
The good neighbor policy.
The good neighbor policy, yes. So let's talk about Mexico and Nicaragua as well.
Yes.
But also part of the Banana Wars too, before I forget, Panama. Basically the US government helped, if not instigate, at least helped a rebellion in Panama succeed so it could break away from Colombia so we could build that good old Panama Canal.
Yeah. The Panama Canal Zone, which is the birthplace of
John McCain.
John McCain, correct. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we had bases there until 1999.
And what? It's owned by Panama now?
Yeah. Jimmy Carter ceded it back to Panama.
Coward. Not willing to stand up for what's really ours.
Yeah. So let's talk about Mexico, though. Interesting. Not known as a place where are bananas grown in Mexico? My guess, probably so.
In the far south, of
but
course.
they're not the traditional. When you say banana republic, and for people who think about history and not the store, they're going to think of a banana republic: Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador. But Mexico isn't traditionally thought of as a banana republic, but it kind of falls within that. I mean, it's just as unstable in some ways as some of the other countries. It's just bigger.
Yeah.
But
really big. Tons of people live there,
Well over 100 million people in Mexico.
Yeah, it's a huge. And World War II, there was some Air Force stuff that they did.
Oh, really?
Yes.
With the Brazilians, too.
Oh, the Brazilians. Yes, that too. The smoking snake.
Yeah, the snake with the pipe.
Yeah, doing their submarine patrols and stuff. And also Italy as well.
Nice. Well, let's talk about Mexico, though. So basically, obviously, we have Mexico after the Mexican-American War, much reduced in size. And they has a dictator for about 40 years or close to it. He dies, and then the Mexican Revolution starts.
Because, to give a quick Cliff Notes, super quick version, Mexico gets its independence from Spain. How? I have no idea. I don't know. All I know is
revolution.
It's a revolution, but I don't know anything about it. And then later, there's a bunch of people in charge, lots of presidents, blah, blah, blah. Juarez, he's the really famous one. He's the one we all know.
Benito Juarez, namesake of Benito Mussolini.
Yes, that's absolutely true. His parents were socialists, and they liked him for whatever reason and decided to name their kid after him. There's an Italian restaurant called Benito's. It's like...
I'm sure there's more than one.
I know who you're naming this after. It's not... But Juarez. So Juarez is the famous leader. He's the statesman. He's the really respectable guy. He's the guy. The intervention happens with France during the Civil War. France tries to install Maximilian I, this Austrian random Habsburg guy, as Emperor of Mexico. Does not work out for him. He's shot against a wall. And Juarez is in charge after that.
And Napoleon III is sad.
Very, very sad. Juarez dies. There's a couple different guys, but Porfirio Diaz is like the main guy. He's
the big kahuna.
Yeah, he's the big kahuna. He's either the guy who's in charge or one of his subordinates is in charge. And they just, like Dmitry Medvedev and Putin, they switch places, but Putin's the guy who's really in charge.
Yeah.
So yeah, for a really long time he's in charge. And then 1910, it's the centenary. It's the 100-year anniversary of Mexico. And in celebration of that, Porfirio Diaz says, Mexico's ready for real democracy. So we're going to hold an election, a real election this time. And whatever the people want to do, they can do. I'm retiring. Except I'm not actually retiring. I'll be in the election. And then the election happens. And then, oh my God, 99% said I should be in charge again. Amazing. It's incredible.
How popular, man.
I'm so popular. So it was, of course, a sham election. And the guy who actually won, Maduro is his name, went into hiding, I think went to America.
Not that Maduro.
Not that Maduro. A little bit different. Not Venezuela's Maduro.
The immortal Maduro.
The bird whisperer, the man who can speak to birds.
Yeah.
The ghosts living inside of birds. He can talk to them. It's all, yeah. But Maduro is like the actual winner. And I don't know the details, but basically the Mexican Revolution happens. Diaz catches a hint and resigns and I think goes to live in Spain or something like that. He leaves the country. Maduro's brought in. They have a real election. Maduro is made the real president. Hooray, happily ever after. No, not really. Actually, not happily ever after, because his main general is this guy named...
Victoriano Huerta?
Yes, precisely. Victoriano. Yes. So Huerta is his main general, his number one guy, but he betrays him. There's this thing called the 10 Tragic Days, and Huerta takes over in a coup, and partially he's like egged on by Henry L. Wilson, that's his name. He's the ambassador to Mexico, and he kind of encourages Huerta to take power, kind of thinking that it's just going to be this peaceful coup, but Huerta murders the old president and the vice president, and the civil war begins, or the revolution. I don't know what you want to call it, a revolution or a civil war, but everything goes to hell right after that.
Yes. And then basically this fighting rages on, and then there's a guy named Venustiano Carranza, who the Americans had supported.
A constitutionalist.
Yes.
Him and Zapata and Pancho Villa are like big figures in that
Yes,
movement.
and there's, Emiliano Zapata, who's more in the south, and then Pancho Villa in the north, and it's really kind of hard to follow, actually.
Yeah, we just know the Cliff Notes version. Maybe we'll do a proper episode about the Mexican Revolution at some point. But.
Yeah. So, and what ends up happening is that the U.S. has a lot of interest in Mexico, particularly in Tampico. A U.S. sailor gets arrested, and this causes a huge kerfuffle. Yeah. And then eventually what happens is that to punish the government, the American government decides to occupy Veracruz.
Yeah, they wanted to do Tampico, but the harbor is too crappy, so they wouldn't be able to do a proper amphibious landing there. So they went to Veracruz instead to take that over.
And it's in this book, I learned so much about that because I didn't know a whole lot about that. I knew that the Marines had landed there, but they stayed there for a while and they occupied the city, and it sounds like pretty not great according to the way he describes it in the book. But long story short is the Navy lands the Marines, and they get into fighting there, and the Marines do have some initial fighting against mainly local like military cadets and sort of local people who kind of just band together to fight back.
This is important because when the intervention happened with France, afterwards Mexico passed a law that said if there's an invading army, people who collaborate will be very harshly punished. So like nobody wants to collaborate. Everybody wants to be seen resisting. So like a lot of just normal people just stand up and try to fight off the Americans. So it's kind of a bloody fight there at the beginning.
Yeah, it's bloody. I mean, I don't think the casualties are particularly high on either side, but it's a bloody, sharp fight. Yes. And interesting enough, Frank Jack Fletcher, later famous World War II admiral, was awarded a Medal of Honor.
Yes.
For the Veracruz action, which is interesting. But this actually forces Huerta out, and Carranza comes into power. But this will later eventually lead to Pancho Villa raiding Columbus, New Mexico.
That's because Wilson hates Huerta. Wilson's got like very strict morals, love him or hate him, but he's got certain things that he really cares about. Yeah. And a violent coup and killing the old president really pisses him off, and he doesn't like that. So he doesn't want to deal with Huerta. I'm not going to recognize your government. Pick somebody else, anybody else, and then maybe we'll play ball afterwards. So that's kind of like the reason for the really bad relationship between America and Mexico at this time.
I thought it was interesting, too. I guess Frederick Funston wants to drive on Mexico City, actually, and they nix that because they're like, we're not invading the whole country.
But the author, Lester D. Langley, he said that, Mexicans give Wilson a really hard time for this intervention. But in his thinking, if a different president was in charge, if like Taft or Roosevelt was in charge and this same circumstance happened, in his opinion, either of those presidents might have been okay with just a full scale, let's go into Mexico City and take it over and just do the second Mexican War, you know?
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, Funston, he's famously the man who captured Emilio Aguinaldo in the Philippines.
Nice.
A Spanish-American War hero.
He shows up in that over-the-top Peter Saras book.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, my God.
You need to read that one.
I'm so excited.
I think I gave that to you.
Yeah, it's sitting on my bedside table over there.
Okay, yeah.
I can't
read
wait.
that. And Frederick Funston plays a big role in one of them.
I love it. Say no more. Say no more.
Yes.
Very excited.
Spoil it. So ultimately, the Mexican part was interesting to learn about that sort of intervention, although he doesn't talk much about the U.S. Pancho Villa expedition in 1916 by Pershing.
I was quite surprised by that. He doesn't talk about it at all, really.
Yeah.
Which is another thing I don't know very much about, just that Patton is involved.
Yeah. A lot of people were involved who later became famous generals or military officers involved in this chase. That there were some battles with the Villistas. I don't know.
Pancho Villa.
Pancho Villa's troops. And none of them were really stunning victories one way or the other. But I guess they could say that they chased Pancho Villa away from the border, so that was enough. Mm-hmm. But
and then Patton strapped that guy to the front of his car.
Yeah.
Like Mad Max.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
But so moving on to another interesting one, Nicaragua. Another country that the U.S. intervened heavily in. Probably
the most famous of the banana wars for being a banana war.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the one that if you thought about what's a banana war, talk about the intervention in Nicaragua, there was a pre-World War I intervention and then a post-World War I intervention.
There's a bunch of really tiny ones. I can't remember which intervention it was that Smedley Butler first was involved in. Maybe it was the one.
I think it was the one in 1912, or was that the Battle of Tepe or something?
I don't know. I wish I knew. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. But that's where he got his name, Gimlet Eye, because he got like a bad case of pink eye in one eye or something, like very bloodshot. Mm-hmm. So it was like bright red on one end. Wow. But yeah, Nicaragua. The really famous one is in 1926.
Yeah, 26 to 33. That's the big famous intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Chesty Puller, that's when he's fighting and all that.
Yeah. It happens because of, like it always happens, there's some kind of civil war problem. There's like liberals and conservatives, and they don't like each other, and they're at an impasse.
And the U.S. is backing the people who would protect their economic interests.
Right.
And that's the thing about this book is that Langley doesn't pull any punches and makes it very clear that a lot of this intervention was not really popular with the people. We weren't doing this as human. This wasn't generally popular with a lot of people in Nicaragua because it was seen as benefiting these economic interests who are not necessarily interested in the benefiting the people who they worked with.
There is that, but it's not as damning as I thought it might be. Mm-hmm. You know, you think banana wars, you think a war fought purely for those sweet, sweet bananas.
To protect United and Standard Fruit.
Yeah, and it's not. Most of these conflicts are just more like there's Americans in trouble or there's American businesses in trouble. We have to walk in and declare neutral zones and disarm everybody. This is a thing that happens over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
But in this conflict, United States comes in, they occupy the country, they occupy the great cities, and for the most part, both sides of this conflict stand down, and we're going to have an election, and we'll figure out who's going to be really in charge of this country. Who's going to be really in charge of this?
Freudian slip.
This fruit company, this great engine of fruit. Except for one guy.
Augusto Sandino. Later the namesake of the Sandinistas of the 1980s. Basically, he runs off into the mountains and he fights a guerrilla war, and the Marines fight against him in a very, you put down in the notes, Vietnam-esque, which I agree with.
Yeah.
Very much this hit-and-run sort of classic guerrilla war campaign in the jungle.
In the book, Lester talks about how, unlike in Haiti with the Caicos, where their enemy is not very savvy about combat, very traditional stand-up and fight kind of thing, and their weapons are horrible. The followers of Sandino, they have great weapons, a lot of times the exact same weapons that the Americans use, the Springfield rifles and even sometimes Thompsons that they capture. But also they're like doing the classic guerrilla warfare kind of thing, and very much like Vietnam, they're crossing over the border a lot. So they're going into
Honduras.
Yeah. eventually Sandino runs away to Mexico. They're getting like military aid from Mexico in this war.
Nice.
Yes. And that's part of the reason they want to fight him, is it's almost like a
proxy war.
Yeah, prototypical proxy war, and even almost like the eventual Cold War. Mexico at this time is a pretty far left government, and they're giving all this aid to this guy out in the jungle. Yeah, like what happens if we go away? This guy might take over the government, and then we'll have a Bolshevized Nicaragua. Oh no, never.
So, but they're not. But Sandino doesn't necessarily fall into that Bolshevik model, as far as I could tell.
No, not really. More of a nationalist.
More of a nationalist. But so the Marines fight this campaign, and he talks about the use of planes and dive bombing is kind of pioneered by Marine pilots in there. And there's some interesting, like there's one where the Marines were in a city surrounded by, they're basically, and what's interesting is that like, the Caicos fought in a lot of those conflicts were these short battles between small groups of bandits. But like Sandino at times could have hundreds of troops mustered, and he actually attacked a couple of cities, one of which they disrupted with dive bombing attacks, and another one where he actually surrounded the city. And basically they had this thing where they would fly, a Marine pilot would fly into and land into the city, and they would stop the plane by running and grabbing like the wings and slowing it down. And
it's a different time, yeah.
I know. Try that with a Boeing 747.
And they would also have planes swoop in and drop supplies in like these tightly bound cubes of stuff. And I can't help but think of the Chindits with Ord Wingate,
Absolutely.
Later in World War II in Burma.
So the Marines ultimately fight this campaign, and they basically fight him to a standstill. There's actually interesting at one point, and the book doesn't talk about him, but that Marine Corps book talked about this guy named Merritt Edson, who later became famous at the Battle of Guadalcanal, leading these patrols on these patrol boat on this river on the border of Honduras to like chase out the Sandino's rebels and stuff like that. But ultimately, they actually reach a ceasefire, I think. And when they leave, Sandino actually kind of becomes part of the government. Then he like later murdered.
Yep. There's a very interesting part in the book where maybe it's apocryphal. The author says maybe this didn't happen, but it's a Marine commander, and he's talking to the current head of Nicaragua, and the current head is like, you guys are such idiots. You're running around in the jungle trying to kill this guy. If I wanted to get rid of this guy, you know how I do it? I would say, welcome back. It's so good to see you. I'd give him a hug, and we'd have a nice dinner, and as he was walking out back to his domicile, we'd slit his throat, and it would be that easy. Like, you guys are such idiots. Why are you
And that's actually how they did. They basically lured him into Managua and killed him that way.
Yeah. It was a little bit of time afterwards. It wasn't immediate, but yeah, they like killed him on an airport, I think.
Something like that. But they basically did that thing where it wasn't, chasing him in the jungle. He wasn't killed in a gunfight with a Marine patrol.
Something about Sandino is that he also attracted a lot of volunteers from all over Central America and South America, even. So, like, all sorts of people would come in to join his band of rebels to help him out. It wasn't just solely a nationalist thing; it was like an anti-American.
And I think which models some of the stuff you would see later in the century.
Yeah.
Sure, but
kind of an inspiration for Sandinistas.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about some scenarios. We've done a lot of establishing sort of the basis of the Banana Wars.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some possible alternate scenarios.
Well, let's go back to the beginning, kind of where this whole thing starts. And let's think about maybe the Panama Canal. That happens very early on.
I would start before the Santo Domingo in 1870s thing, the grant.
Duh.
I told them we were going to come back to it, Max. I can't forget to.
I completely forgot, personally. But yes, of course, Santo Domingo. So, from what I understand from this Grant biography, what happened is that the U.S. Navy is expanding after the Civil War. And an important part, especially back then with the technology that's not as good as today, they need coaling stations.
Wait, they didn't have nuclear reactors? Nuclear reactors, sailing ship.
Only when Harry Turtledove is writing it do they have that. Or no, sorry, S.M. Sterling.
Exactly.
Because he's the one who's like the super duper technological advances that don't make any sense kind of thing. But yeah, so the U.S. really wanted to have coaling stations, and they would, of course, they don't have Puerto Rico yet or Guantanamo Bay, so they need something. And it's actually an example of voluntary annexation. Like the nation of Santo Domingo was worried about Haiti as a military opponent, and they were like, we're concerned that we can't protect ourselves, so we would like to go to the American government to protect us. So we're willing to be annexed by the United States as a territory or whatever you want. Just protect a protectorate. Just
Protect us.
protect us. So they come to the Grant administration and offer this. Elihu Washburn goes down there and like negotiates an agreement and goes back to Washington, puts it before the Senate, and the Senate shoots it down.
The Senate.
Stupid Senate. Charles Sumner, the guy who famously got his ass kicked by Preston Brooks, just got bodied in front of everyone, getting the crap beaten out of him with a cane. He recovered and then later became an idiot who didn't want to annex Santo Domingo for a couple reasons. One, he was afraid about cost. Oh no, the budget might not be balanced. Oh no.
Some Sterling's devising a time machine right now to go back and switch that up.
He's going to finish the job. Preston, please, let me help you. But also because, the classic, like, this country full of Catholic people, like, do we really want to add this to the United States? I don't think so, buddy. Not me, speaking as Mr. Sumner.
Oh, my goodness.
So it didn't end up happening, but it could have happened. If Grant was more savvy with political stuff, if he was able to make deals
if he wasn't having to fight off all those damn gigantic mechanical spiders.
Oh no, I'm caught in this net. Help me.
Yeah, maybe he'd have time to devote it to some foreign policy.
Jim West, help me.
No, so I'd be interested. So what does this look like if the U.S. annexes the Dominican Republic in the 1870s? So obviously it's going to eventually become a state.
Yes. Maybe it'll take until the 20th century, the 21st century, but eventually
I'd say that sometime in the 20th century.
Yeah, most likely, yeah.
But would that be interesting as that? So the U.S. has a foothold in the Caribbean. Does this change up the Spanish-American War? Maybe the U.S. is more willing to annex Cuba because they already have?
Or just the opposite. Maybe America is like, we've got the Dominican Republic as our bailiwick.
Domingo.
The state of Dominic here. We have Dominic, so why do we want all these other places? Like, we don't need them. Like, maybe Spain will just leave them alone and have their own little conflict. Maybe it's silly.
Maybe I don't know, but it may change the calculus because the U.S. doesn't need Guantanamo Bay if they've already got it. Although Guantanamo Bay is one of the best natural harbors in the whole world.
It's a very good deal. Very good deal.
Very good deal.
But yeah, maybe they're not as gun shy about adding things to the United States. If you overcome that first
the Platt
hurdle.
Amendment going to even exist if you already have the U.S. owning an overseas territory? Will they later annex Haiti? Will they?
It's a very small sea. It's not that far away. Yeah, you say overseas, but
it's not that far. It's not that far, but it is. It's outside of the continental United States, and it would be the first major U.S. possession outside the continental United States at that point.
I mean, Hawaii is like way more crazy than this.
And that comes in 1880. It comes in 1898.
Yeah, Grover Cleveland. You know?
Yeah.
Yes.
My boy Grover.
I would love to know more about the annexation of Hawaii.
Yeah, I need to learn. I need to learn more about it, but it is quite interesting. But so let's say you have how does that change demographics? Does that change? Is there a presidential election that could be changed by that? I don't know enough, but
and also free movement of peoples. I mean, this is back in the 1800s, 1870s or so. So I mean, like that's way more time than even Puerto Rico in the United States. That was way later. 30, 40 years later before there was free movement between the two.
Yeah. So
places.
What does that look like? Yeah.
And also you're sharing a border with Haiti, which is a country which historically has had lots of civil wars and conflicts with the Dominican Republic.
Certainly, if that's the case, the first U.S. intervention in Haiti is probably coming long before 1915.
Yes, most likely. And maybe
a full annexation or occupation or annexation, just to sort of like, we're going to just, stop this from being an issue by just always being there.
And, who knows? Maybe a voluntary annexation. Maybe, hey, it worked out for...
the state of Hispaniola.
You've got East Dominic and West Dominic. You've got two separate states with separate senators and everything. That would be kind of interesting.
Oh my goodness. That is raised interesting, but there's some other ones I want to explore too, more than just Dominican Republic.
More than just that, yeah. More than just Hispaniola.
Nicaragua Canal, Max.
Nicaragua, yes. Well, isn't it way easier to make a canal through Lake Nicaragua?
Yeah, actually, Nicaragua, the terrain is flatter. You have this big lake in the center where you don't have to. So, frankly, Nicaragua actually makes more sense to build a canal there. But for various reasons, Panama, which is much, I think, is narrower, but is much hillier and much more difficult. The Nicaragua Canal would make much more sense.
I think, if I remember correctly, the ruler of Nicaragua was very intransigent and didn't want to play ball with Theodore Roosevelt. So he's like, no, I'll go with my weird secessionist plot against Grand Colombia, and then we'll do it this way. But yeah, if things were just a little bit different, we could have it through Nicaragua.
Yeah, and that would be interesting because how does that change Nicaragua? So is certainly, the U.S. involvement in Nicaragua will be much heavier. Is there going to be a canal zone in Nicaragua?
Well, the canal zone, if you're going through Lake Nicaragua, is friggin' gigantic. It's huge. You got this giant lake to work with.
And Managua is right on Lake Nicaragua. So.
Yeah, it's not like in the boonies or anything. This is like the heart and soul of Nicaragua. Yeah. So, that's kind of interesting. And Panama stays part of Colombia as well. So Colombia borders Costa Rica now.
Mega Colombia.
It's slightly grander Colombia.
Yeah, exactly. What else? And you mentioned something about it. Apparently there was some Japanese plan at some point to build a rival canal or what? You know more about this than I do.
Yeah, they mentioned in this book that when the Theodore Roosevelt Nicaragua deal falls through, the leader of Nicaragua, I can't remember his name for the life of me, but he says, well, maybe I'll just make a deal with someone else. And he mentioned specifically the Japanese, which really gets my noggin jogging. And that's,
my goodness.
What if there was a Japanese canal right next to the American canal,
A Japanese canal in Nicaragua and a U.S. canal in Panama, that makes for an interesting World War II.
Interesting to say the least, yes. Yeah. Two dueling canal zones.
That's right. Where's the first strike? Is it on Panama Canal, or is the Japanese fleet going to sail up and bomb New Orleans or something like that? I mean, it's not going to be unusual, I guess, to have a Japanese fleet in the Caribbean, which is bizarre.
Well, we have to visit Japanese Western Africa, so we have to go visit our colony over there.
Oh, my goodness.
And then we'll make a detour and attack the United States.
Ground war in Central America in World War II, geez. The Central American Front.
Costa Rica, finally a site of warfare. Isn't their whole thing that they don't have an army? Yeah, that's where the Central American Court was, which is mentioned briefly in this book. Yeah. An arbitrational
Costa Rica
body.
has managed to avoid the instability that a lot of their other neighbors have had.
I'll say that there's a video game, which I guess is kind of alternate history. It's called Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, and it's set in Costa Rica. And it's very stupid and silly. But there's characters who are Sandinistas. They're like Chico and Paz and all these. It's very dumb. It's very very silly. But that is a Costa Rican alternate history there.
What's another? Oh, what if Frederick Funston gets his way? What if the U.S. launches a full-scale invasion of Mexico? What does that look like? I think that actually changes a whole lot because this is happening, 1914, 1915. Not that long before the U.S. enters World War I.
Exactly. A question is, what's the goal in taking Mexico City? Is the goal to just have a free and fair election, get a good president, and then we'll pull out once we feel that Mexico is sufficiently...
Build a country that can compete with the Dracas.
Yes.
Steam war cars, dirigibles, ramjets. The U.S. from the Arctic to Colombia.
S.M. Sterling just nodding. Yes, beautiful. Speaking of... well, I'll get to this in a second, but I mean...
what is the goal?
what's
Because
the goal?
Occupying a country of that size, even at the time, is beyond the power of the United States Army, which is not very big at the time.
I mean, to be fair, in a lot of these banana wars, they're able to just... even in Veracruz, they're able to have a short, sharp fight in the city, but once that's over, people are willing to just play ball and just kind of ease off. So it's tough to do with the Marine Corps of that day, and
Even
the
this
Navy.
would have to include the Army,
Mostly
too.
it's Blue Jackets, obviously, and the
I think
Army as well.
But it's not big enough.
Yeah, to occupy every major city. But Veracruz, according to this book, is like the third or fourth biggest city in Mexico. So it is kind of a huge deal.
So if they hold, what does the U.S. hold Veracruz in perpetual occupation? Oh my God, can you imagine that? Like how bad our relationship would be with Mexico if we permanently occupied like a city.
The free city of Veracruz.
Exactly.
They just won't elect good men. That's the problem. Wilson is just banging on his chair as hard as he can.
Oh my goodness. Well, does that bring up like the possibility of like the Zimmerman telegram actually having some relevance? The Mexican front in World War I.
The United States are such jerks that yes, I'm willing to join you.
Yeah, the German Expeditionary Force makes its way across the Atlantic somehow.
First, they're going to stop in Haiti.
Yeah.
No, I'm just joking. But I mean, yeah. Because this book also talks about how in Haiti, there's the United States had paranoia that German influence was shaping Haitian politics. Oh no.
I wonder where
Haiti will join the Central Powers in World War I. No.
Exactly. Although they are a member of the Central Powers in the Harry Turtledove.
Oh, yeah.
Haiti is an American ally, and it's mentioned that it's under Confederate occupation.
Well, did you know that Cuba declared war on Germany in World War I?
Nice.
It did. I don't know what they did, but they joined World War I.
Teaching them a lesson.
Well, to get back to S.M. Stirling, in the Black Chamber series, the pointed versions of that series is that Taft has a heart attack right before the election of 1912. So Theodore Roosevelt consolidates the Republican and progressive votes together, and he becomes president. And who knew that William Howard Taft having a heart attack could result in the United States becoming the Dracas, basically. Because like they do all kinds of crazy stuff. They have an intervention in Mexico, but it's a super duper intervention, and it's kind of sort of annexed into the United States. Like they just take the whole thing over.
Oh my God.
And it's like the time scale is crazy because like the intervention in our timeline is 1914, and then by 1916, which is where the first book is set, there's suddenly everyone has airships, everyone has dirigibles everywhere, and
it's inevitable, Max. It's inevitable.
In like the next 1 or 2 years, they all develop really good radar and nerve gas and like all this crazy stuff. I read the first 2 books and I actually enjoy them, despite their very silly,
their implausibility at times.
Their classic Sterlingisms. Yeah.
Well, it'd be interesting to see. I don't think the United States had any sort of desire really to invade Mexico whole scale, even though they have this. I mean, maybe perhaps you could see occupations of parts of northern Mexico to protect the American border or something like that. But eventually I feel like they're going to withdraw. There's not going to be some perpetual, the U.S. isn't going to have a perpetual border zone that they're going to occupy.
It would be very unpopular because like in our timeline, Dominican Republic and Haiti.
Our timeline, you mean in history?
Yes, OTL. So Wilson sent the Marines to occupy the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And 1920 comes around. Who's president? Our guy, Warren Harding.
Yes.
Warren Gamaliel, not Gamaliel. Gamaliel.
Is that how it is?
Yep, I learned this.
Gamaliel.
Yep. Gamaliel.
W. Gamaliel Harding.
At least that's the way he pronounced it. I don't know.
Really?
He also called himself Warren Harding. So, what does that tell you? I don't know.
It doesn't make. It's no one pronounce. It's sort of like it's saying like my name is John. I pronounce it Joan.
Juan.
It's like there's like some things that are just very James. I mean, I guess Javri. I guess you could say it like that, but it's just Warren.
Max, M-A-X. No, it's Maz. Pronounce that Maz. It's silly, but yeah, Warren.
Spelled Max, pronounced Lewis.
Gamaliel Harding.
Oh.
So he ran on a platform of let's get out of Hispaniola.
Normalcy, a return to normalcy.
Normalcy. One thing that's not normal, having Marines occupying the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Let's get the hell out of one of them. Not both of them, but they end up getting out of the Dominican Republic in 1924, I think it is, which is technically Coolidge's.
That's Coolidge,
yeah, but but it was a policy set up by Warren Harding. So yeah, but I mean, like, let's say Wilson goes whole hog on Mexico.
Yeah.
Warren Harding comes in. It's like, let's get out of Mexico. So, I mean, it would be a popular oppositional platform to get out of Mexico.
I don't see a permanent occupation of Mexico happening.
Yeah, I don't think so. And Mexicans don't want it either.
No.
So
It would just take too many resources.
Yeah.
And, no one
For
wants
what
them.
purpose? What's the reason? What do you want from this? To make people elect good men, to have a better country, something they talk about in this book, Veracruz. The Marines come in, they occupy it, and they do all this public works stuff. They like reform the sanitation policies of the country, of the city. So like they bring in like tens of thousands of trash cans from the United States and set up like a trash pickup system.
Instead of throwing trash in the middle of the street or whatever.
They talk about in the book how they just have vultures come in, and the vultures just eat everything, eat all the trash, So, I mean, like the Marines, there is a humanitarian aspect to this, but it's like a very paternalistic and kind of racist humanitarian aspect. It's like you guys
White
are
man's
too...
burden.
Yeah, it's our white man's burden to help you dumb Mexicans who can't pick up your own trash or whatever. There is like an aspect to it, but it's like a very unpopular aspect because they're talking down to these people. And in a lot of these cases, they exit from these countries, from Mexico, from Haiti, from the Dominican Republic. And in a lot of cases, for instance, Haiti, things are just as bad then as they are right now in 2020,
Yeah, exactly.
Not Mexico, obviously. But, these changes don't stick.
Exactly. And that's, one of the things about the banana wars that I think maybe doesn't resonate, why it doesn't resonate as so much is that a lot didn't change. I mean, a lot of these countries were still unstable, and we continue to intervene.
Yeah.
Guatemala in 1954 and Cuba and all that. But
LBJ sent soldiers into...
in the 60s, the 82nd
Dominican,
Airborne.
Dominican Republic.
Clinton sent troops in the 90s to Haiti with Aristide.
Yeah. Not to protect banana plantations, but,
To ensure elections or...
whatever it was, we don't know because we don't remember because nobody talks about it. Nobody,
Exactly. Well, there's plenty of, American post-World War II interventions in various countries that just don't resonate. But another scenario I did want to talk about is what if the banana wars stay bananas? They never end. What if 1933 and 1934 come around and FDR is like, no, these belong to us. No, permanent occupation or possible annexation. What does that look like? Are we fighting, like communist guerrillas in the 80s and the 90s,
The United States of fruit. Yes.
That's right. Yes. We have all the fresh fruit we want.
The state of Dole, the state of Chiquita.
Exactly.
Sam the Banana Man is president of the United States. Yes.
But no, it raises interesting. What does that does that raise? Like, if the U.S. has permanent occupation forces in Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Nicaragua, what does that do to the U.S. military, the Marines, the Army, the Navy? Does that change the way? Are we better prepared to fight guerrilla wars down the line in Vietnam and stuff like that? Or are we fighting our own damn guerrilla war in Nicaragua and Haiti? Are the Soviets running AK-47s, in Nicaragua? Are the Soviets going to deploy troops to Honduras? Are we going to have like U.S. and Soviet troops going to be clashing in Central America?
The Guatemalan missile crisis.
Exactly. Yeah. Why not? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure if the United States, for some reason, wanted to occupy these countries forever, then yeah. I mean, the short period that they occupied these countries, obviously Haiti was 19 friggin' years, but even like countries that had short occupations like Veracruz was only a couple months, still talked about to this day in bitter terms.
Imagine it's 2020 and American troops are still in Haiti.
Year 80 of their occupation. Like, no.
Year 105.
Oh, well, 105, right? Haiti, yeah, of course.
At that point, you wonder if they would contemplate annexation, or would they try some sort of, is what Nixon called like Vietnamization, which is like they reduce the number of actual American troops in there, but they try and train up local troops and equip them with American stuff. Or is that where we send all our Shermans and stuff after World War II? There you go.
Like the Arvins. Here have all these like M1 carbines.
Garands,
yeah.
And carbines. But stuff like that. It'd be interesting. What does that look like? Does that result in a much more hostile Central America, more open to the Soviets because they're like, well, it's the, why are the Americans still around 30, 40 years later? Does the United Fruit stay United Fruit? Do they not take on Chiquita Banana? Am I going to go into the grocery store and get some chopped up canned mangoes from Standard Fruit? Stuff like that.
Yeah, it's I don't know.
It's funny to think about, but
galvanizes all of the South American countries into
right.
Ridiculous anti-Americanism.
Or is it something that people don't,
they don't think about?
Just don't think about. It's just kind of a baseline, we're there to maintain order.
Yeah, well, it's always been that way. So,
no, I think this has been an interesting conversation, talking about something that really just doesn't get a whole lot of attention.
We were talking about Mexico. What if, let's say, America does the silly thing and wants to occupy all of Mexico for whatever reason? Does that distract America so much they don't want to join the First World War? They're so busy with this stuff. It's like this European conflict doesn't even really matter to us.
Very well. That would be interesting to see. Would that change? Is there, oh my goodness, the Kaiser. It's 1970. The Kaiser's still around.
Oh my God. Let's see, something else. Remember that one time we were going to record an episode about Cold War Africa, but instead we watched Hey Arnold, the Jungle movie?
I do.
That's a Central American related thing.
That's right. We still need to do that Cold War Africa episode.
Yeah, I think we could.
We got a lot of good ideas for that.
I was looking at some books about the Congo crisis and the First and Second Congo Wars and all this stuff.
Angola.
Like, learn about Omar Bongo, that guy of Equatorial Africa, Central African Republic.
Is Bongo Gabon?
I don't remember.
There's the guy who ran Equatorial Guinea. That guy was interesting.
Super crazy. The guys dressed up like Santa Claus, killing people in soccer stadiums or whatever.
Yeah, that was Equatorial Guinea, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I would like to do an episode on that.
Max, well, we could do that one next. We do Cold War Africa. We need to do Over the Top. I've got another book called If the Allies Had Fallen, which has got a ton of hyper-technical World War II scenarios.
I actually have that one.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yes. I've actually, if you look over there, I've got a short story compilation, Roads Not Taken.
I have Roads Not Taken. There's a great story in there.
I know which one you're talking about. The Turtle Dove.
Must and Shall.
Must and Shall, yes. It's also got a story written by Gene Wolfe, who is an author I really, really like a lot. But I read a synopsis of the story, and it sounds really stupid. So I'm kind of interested.
Aristotle and the Gun is in that one, too.
Oh, yeah, Ellsberg de Camp. Yes.
Yeah, well, we've got so many. Oh, that's the great thing about alternate history, Max. There's so much still left to...
And is Sterling in that as well? I think he might be.
I don't think so.
No?
If I recall. It's been a long time since I've read that one.
And, of course, Minister Boris and other things that didn't happen.
Yeah, we got to do that, yeah. The possibilities are endless, Max.
Possibilities are endless. And, I kind of thought I would work something in here real quick. We've never done an advertisement before, but, this is something that I just feel so passionate about, and that's throat discs. Throat discs. Yes, that's right. It's a herbal lozenge, and it's a lozenge that I quite like in my personal life. I use this stuff all the time. It's delicious. It's for dry mouth, overuse. If you use your mouth too much, take this, and hoarseness, and it tastes good. A lot of times, you have a lozenge and it's like this candy. It's like this clear stuff, super sweet. You're like basically having a Jolly Rancher. That's for babies. This is for like grown adults, like real men and women, truly mature people would have something like throat discs. And Matt, you've had throat discs before, yes?
I don't think so.
No, you have. You didn't like them. I don't think.
Maybe I did. Yeah, maybe I didn't. I'm glad that you like them.
Would you like one?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. It's got all kinds of stuff in it. It's got licorice powder. Licorice. That's a taste children don't like very much. I remember when I was in Boise, Idaho, I was there with my grandpa. He was like, "You've got to have a milkshake that's got huckleberries in it because huckleberries are delicious and you should have it. And it's such an interesting taste." And the place made this milkshake, and I started drinking it, and I was like, "Papa, I don't like this very much." And he was like, "You're lying to me. You're lying. No way. That's ridiculous. How could you say that?" And he got so pissed off about it. And then the lady behind the counter said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I gave you licorice flavored stuff instead." I was like, oh, okay. Well,
How
I'm
did
so
you
sorry,
mistake
Max.
huckleberries for licorice?
I don't know. They're right next to each other I don't know. But yeah. So anyways, you got licorice powder in it. You've got anethol oil, cubeb, anise oil. You know what anise is? You ever seen that before?
Anise seed, yes.
Yes. The weird star-shaped stuff. It's used in a lot of Chinese food, right?
Yes.
Yes. Capsaicin, peppermint oil. It's great. I love this stuff. If you want to have throat discs, please visit www.throatdiscs.com. And that's DISCS disc. This is like a Discworld disc, not like 3 1/4 floppy disk. It's a different kind of disc. But I greatly encourage everyone who wants a lozenge, wants to try something maybe a little bit different, to give that a shot. Well,
this has been interesting. I've enjoyed talking about this because this is something that I know we spent a lot of time working on the build up to it, but there's so much that this is just not in the general popular imagination and knowledge of history in the United States. I mean, it's just not paid attention to.
I mean, if you told someone, true or false, the United States occupied Haiti for 19 years, almost no one would say that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much everybody would probably think that was a load of bunko. But no, that really happened.
Yeah.
And I really recommend reading this book because we only scratched the surface of the amount of stuff that's in here. Like, some of it was in one ear and out the other, for me. But there's all kinds of really interesting stuff in here.
It's a very interesting book, and I've learned a ton about something that there's just not a lot of general knowledge about it. So I think that's about it. So this is Matt signing off.
And this is Max signing off.
Have a great day.